Friends, welcome back to another Before You Read lecture. This is the first of two lectures that will focus on the post-exilic prophets. You'll remember that the exile, the start and end of exile, are sort of significant moments as we consider the prophetic literature. Jeremiah was a prophet of exile. He was writing to a people in and from exile. Second and third Isaiah, however, are post-exilic prophetic oracles. They are getting at what does life look like after exile? What is the future of the temple and what is the future of the institution of the king? Many of these post-exilic prophets are included in a collection of writings known as the minor prophets. The minor prophets, not because of their significance or weight, but really because of their length. They are shorter than Jeremiah or Isaiah or Ezekiel. This lecture on the post-exilic prophets will focus on Haggai and Zechariah 1 through 8. These two writings, or these two portions of writings, are really about the prophetic activity in and around the rebuilding of the temple. Before getting into the specifics of Haggai and Zechariah, I thought it might be helpful to provide a bit more of an overview of the minor prophets, also known as the Book of the 12, or the 12 prophets. Since antiquity, these 12 short writings of named and unnamed prophets have been regarded as something like a unit. Ben Sira, a 2nd century BC author, describes the collection simply as the 12 prophets. Manuscripts that were found around the Dead Sea in 1946 also preserve these 12 writings in a single scroll, thinking that they were meant to be held together or even read together. Now the question of why collect them, why these 12 writings, is kind of hard to answer. We could think that there are 12 prophets and that's similar to the 12 tribes of Israel's. Also, there's probably a practical reason. These writings are shorter, and if they sort of circulated on their own, there's a greater chance that they would be lost. And so grouping them together helps keep these shorter writings a part of the corpus. Now, the 12 writings, the 12 minor prophets, are Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. There is a rough chronological order to this arrangement, although there is a different order in the Hebrew version of the Old Testament and the Greek version of the Old Testament. This is an important thing to note. There is also a theological connection with their arrangement. So in the Jewish canon, there are 3 parts to the Jewish canon: the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses; the Nevi'im, the prophets, which is the middle section; and then the Ketuvim, the writings. And it's significant that the book of the 12 minor prophets, occurs at the end of the Nevi'im. So it's really in the middle of the Jewish canon. The Christian canon, however, places the 12, the book of the 12, at the very end of the canon. And this plays a significant theological role insofar as it ends with the book of Malachi, and the book of Malachi sort of ends with an Elijah-like figure who is, preparing for the end of the end of days. And so Malachi becomes a bridge, if you will, to the Gospel of Matthew. So a fascinating, perhaps theologically oriented arrangement to the Christian Old Testament. While these 12 writings all emerge from different time periods, they do have at least a couple of shared themes. And one of the most important shared themes has to do with eschatology. Now that's just a fancy word, 2 Greek words: eschatos, which means last or end, and tology, study, or thinking, or logic of. And so eschatology is the study or the reflection on the end times. these 12 writings demonstrate a particular interest in the judgment that occurs at the end of days. All but Jonah and Nahum refer to the so-called Day of the Lord. The Day of the Lord was originally a feast day or a festival day in Israelite religious practice, but it becomes the day of God's judgment on the whole earth. And so there's a general pattern in the book of the 12 that there is a specific judgment against God's people that broadens out into a more general judgment of all of God's people. And as I said, the significance of Malachi ending the book of the 12 in the Christian canon is significant because it predicts Elijah coming before the great and terrible day of the Lord. That's about all I want to say about the book of the 12. Now I want to dig in on our two focus texts, which are Haggai and Zechariah chapter 1 through 8. Eric Myers, in his introduction to Haggai in the New Interpreter's Study Bible, suggests that Haggai and Zechariah chapters 1 through 8 actually make up what he calls a composite work. The two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, are both mentioned together in Ezra 5 and Ezra 6:14. According to the writings of Ezra, both prophets were active at the time when Jerusalem was being built. The two prophetic writings that bear their names both focus in one way or another on the rebuilding of the temple, so there's some connection there. Myers adds that the time frame for these prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, are actually very specific and very brief, from roughly August 29th, 520 to December 7th, 1518, so just over a couple years. Haggai calls attention to the beginning of the work and the actual rebuilding of the temple. Zechariah and his visions really are reactions to the event of the building. So if we wanted to put them in a chronological order, we might say that Haggai is first and then comes Zechariah. Another important date to keep in mind is December 18th, 520 BCE, which is when the temple, the temple's refoundation, its rebuilding, was celebrated, and that seems to be the centerpiece, the core of the idea of Haggai and Zechariah 1 through 8. Just a few words about each of these two writings. First, with Haggai. Haggai seems to suggest that there were some disputes among the exiles who had returned to Judah about the temple building project. It seems as though the issue is that folks returning were being a little reluctant to provide their resources, material and otherwise, to the building project. They were putting their needs first and maybe investing in their own livelihood before providing for the temple. And Haggai's message is really refracted through a cultural mindset of the ancient Near Eastern world, where there was a belief that the religious cult was tied to fertility, that both human fertility and the fertility of the earth. And so if the people are experiencing hardship, the reason is because they have not been worshiping correctly, or they have been abandoning their cultic responsibilities. And so that seems to be the message that Haggai is communicating. You're experiencing hardship because you haven't yet prioritized your gifts to the temple. Zechariah, as I mentioned early, is really interested in the moments that follow the rededication of the temple and its rebuilding. Critical scholarship associates chapters 1 through 8 of Zechariah with Haggai, as I mentioned earlier, and really views chapters 9 through 14 as a later addition. In fact, Zechariah's name doesn't occur again after chapter 8. There's very likely that there was some editing in this work of Zechariah. It's possible that they were originally independent works that were later joined together, although there are some interwoven themes throughout Zechariah, and the major focus really is on the temple. The first 8 chapters of Deuteronomy can be outlined in a fairly self-explanatory way. Chapters 1 verses 1 through 6 is more prose, and it resembles, it sort of echoes Deuteronomy. Then in 1:7 through 6:15 we get Zechariah's series of visions. Some are stranger than others. And then in chapters 7 through 8 we again have more sayings, and again there's a semblance to the writings of Deuteronomy. Important themes in Zechariah include the dedication of the temple, and a very interesting and important development in Israelite thinking, and that is there seems to be a power-sharing agreement between the king and the priest, or the governor, the appointed governor of Judah, and the priest. And this then leads to some expectations about a Messiah who will be peaceful as opposed to violent. So, needless to say, this theme in Zechariah is an important step in the developing understanding of the Messiah, of the awaited one, and certainly what we'll see in the New Testament with the arrival of Jesus. So, as you read, the first thing I want you to pay attention to is that these are very liminal writings. They are transitional writings. These are written to people who have returned from exile and who are just beginning to rebuild their lives. They're just about to reestablish normal, if you will. And so the first question to ask is, how do these writings address this transitional period? How do they instill hope? How do they inspire action? A second question would follow from that, and that is, how do they help you or help us manage similar transitions, similarly transitional moments in our own lives? And finally, be on the lookout for how Zechariah and Haggai point to and speak about the end of days, or the great day of the Lord. What is it like, and what happens in it? Well, I hope that you will enjoy your reading of Haggai and Zechariah. It's a shorter selection of reading, but one that I think will have plenty to talk about in the end. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Now, happy reading.